My guest today is, in some ways, a very typical Silicon Valley founder. Immigrant background, a Stanford degree, a stint at Google, and then the inevitable leap to a startup. But instead of building another AI tool that cranks out 4,000 personalized cold emails, he went for something with a little more meaning. Autograph, which turns your life story into a digital legacy. Think of it as a personal journal on steroids, except instead of a dusty notebook, you get an AI that remembers your stories, asks better follow-up questions than most of your friends, and might even whisper, "I'm proud of you," to your grandkids one day. Cristian Cibils Bernardes, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Blade. That was an awesome intro, man. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
I don't usually start with this question, but given the sort of novelty of what you're doing, can you explain what Autograph does and why it might be important to somebody who's listening to the podcast?
For sure. Autograph is I guess we created this character called Walter, and he's, the world's first personal historian that helps you keep track of your story and get your own story straight, but also is a connector of sorts that helps generations connect over time. So the idea is Walter interviews you once a week, almost like a journal that you make a promise to write in, once a week. Walter will call you, ask you about your day, ask you about your week. We'll get to know you from your childhood to present day. We have a web portal where we create wiki pages for your life of every person, every event, every story. But the highlight thing that we do is that we also make a model of you that sounds like you and speaks like you and has all your memories, so that your wisdom and lived experience can live on even after you're no longer around, and you can, at least be present in some way or another for your loved ones, even beyond the limits of your biological self. And so the experience that we really want to create is Walter is not just the input source where he's asking you questions, but he's also surfacing your relevant cultural context, so that, for instance, you may be having a difficult week, figuring out whether to make a move to New York for some reason. We have a job offer, and you're telling Walter this, and Walter can say, "Hey, this reminds me of something your grandpa went through. Would you like to talk to him for 15 minutes?" And instead of just having a transcript or a diary or a static piece of information, for the first time in history, you'd be able to not just hear the story of Grandpa's decision to move to or out of New York, but also you'd be able to ask it questions and ask it, what was the fallout? What would you have done differently? What was the cost? How did it affect Grandma? The more robust your network presence is in Autograph, you would also be able to ask Grandma what she felt and the kids which they felt. And, maybe two of the kids had a great time, but one of the kids was in love and had to break up with her first love. So you get to understand the mythology that made you and how you relate to that mythology in this present day. And we meet our users at the peaks and valleys in life. People show up when there's a huge accomplishment, some graduation, usually a big birthday, or also at the valleys in life, like when our finiteness is more importantly brought to mind. And so we're in a very unique position to, really tap into these very human feelings of what does it mean to be human? What does it feel like to be human? And give folks an outlet to feel like the main character in their own story for, 20 minutes a week. And what we've found so far is that it's a need. It's not a want. It's not an aspiration. That there's so many people out there of all different ages who just need to feel heard and need to have their experience valid or feel valid. And Walter does a remarkable job at that. It's very early days for us, but it's the most motivating thing you can imagine. Just being placed in a position of trust to deliver on this big idea.
One thing that you pulled in there is the sort of network effects of having multiple people in your sort of radius or circle on the platform. How have you sort of envisioned the positive network effects of the scale that you would hope to get to with a product that brings in a lot more exciting opportunities?
There's a couple layers. Funny that you mentioned network effects. Our lead investor is called NFX, and they're all about network effects. It's one of those rare businesses that has network effects at every turn of the conversation, where we're always in the process of discovering who you are, and by doing that, you're actually in the audience seat too. So you're also discovering who you are. And so we build this really long-term relationship with our users where we discover the things that matter to them and are constantly reminded and reminding them of what matters to them. So there's a feel-good network effect forever, even just in the single-player mode. If you take the multiplayer mode to the extreme, where you let's say we have 3 generations of millions of people using this, then all of a sudden our engagement with time and the world changes, right? Because all of a sudden you can actually just interview folks that you otherwise wouldn't have had access to with different, privacy settings, where, public figures may give you their public profiles and give that access to everybody. But you'd also be able to interrogate your every second cousin or every, all your grandparents' cousins and see how far the family tree branched out, And more excitingly, I mean, it broadens the surface area of relevant experience that may be tied to your own. If you only have one person's story, there's probably some commonalities in what you're going through and what they went through. But if you broaden that out to, 50 or 60 people, all of a sudden you have a tribe of folks whose life, who they're, by nature of being family or being connected by an affinity group, they intentionally let this data be serviced to you when you need it. So we're actually just trying to, create mechanisms for families and affinity groups to accrue social capital over time in a way that, had been reserved to the families that could afford biographers or that can afford family offices with rituals.
The immediate thing that comes to mind there is a much more close-knit and civil version of Reddit as an endgame.
Yeah. Reddit is a different thing. Reddit is for, I think that Reddit is fantastic for wisdom of the masses curation. In aggregate, the votes are gonna add up to whatever the mob wants. Here it's more about actually you can make a way more informed decision about your life because you have a relationship with each of the people that you would be accessing to. Our relationship with every human being in our family is very complex. We understand and love each other, but we also understand that we have personality differences, and I would do things differently, or I want to do it my way. So I'm just excited about this new interaction with history, where instead of learning this is the story that happened on a textbook, all of a sudden there's a conversation.
How has being the sort of host of your own little podcast informed, or even obviously the discussions you had at university, informed some of the Socratic nature that has to go into Walter to sort of pull out some of the best answers from everybody's story?
Massively. I think I started my little podcast to start the conversation about what happens when AI takes over, basically, or what do we do what is our humanity in the age of AI? And I have written a book that sort of tries to outline my thoughts on what is going to happen and what do we need to do to preserve our meaning-making capability in a world where everybody's living in their own, meaning islands. And so I started the podcast, and I'm very curious myself, so I just love geeking out about stuff. It could be philosophy, could be psychology, could be AI, could be religion, could be, anywhere. I love my world model, and I love tending to it. And what I realized, after a few interviews is wait a minute, it's such a beautiful surface to actually just hold space with someone and get to know somebody. And how did you become this person that is interested in the things that you're interested in now? And as an outspur of that, I realized, my goodness, I'm interviewing all these fancy seeming folks. I should really have my grandma's story down. And so I made a point to interview my grandma. It wasn't going to be for the podcast, but it was just to document her crazy story. Her family fled Europe during the war. Her dad was an MI6 agent. They would communicate over secret messages. They ended up in Paraguay, of all possible places. And so I wanted to canonicalize that. And a few days before our interview, she had a stroke. And that was the trigger where I was wait a minute, how do I blend in my background in tech and, building AI and with this love I have for the medium of interviewing and just like eliciting the real stuff out of folks and like, an earnest spirit of connection. Um, and, and actually you just like, actually, what is the gift that this could be for the next generation? And once I started seeing it, I was like, I can't unsee this. And I was late for my grandma, but I'm, not late for my parents. And that is like a thing that I carry.
You've talked a lot about sort of the ideal of world building and storytelling, and obviously that's sort of at the heart of everything that's going on with Autograph. And I'm a big D&D guy, and I just enjoy world building as a pastime. And one of the things that I know that I encounter, so I can only imagine how this scales to millions of people, is worrying about something like information bloat or overwhelm, or ensuring that like the signal to noise ratio of the information that you're collecting from people is valuable. Seems like the wrong word, but like valuable to the people that are going to be interacting with Walter and their family members or whoever else in the future. So how do you think about making sure that you're capturing the best stuff?
That's a phenomenal question. I mean, what we aim to do is, what is the stuff that you need to get out of your chest as a human being before you go? Like, and if you like, I look at it kind of from first principles, where if you think about the energetic and evolutionary cost that it takes to make a human, and then if you ask that human to prioritize based on their life, what is the most important stuff that they could pass on, or what is the most important feeling that they need to, that is like, there's so much leverage in terms of intelligence there that, you know, like there's something to be said about the value of just like saying stuff. Like, what is the stuff that you haven't said yet, or like you haven't allowed yourself to organize into a story? And then our job is like, of that story, how do we pick apart with all the privacy considerations and whatnot, like how do we take the meat and the protein and organize it so that it's surfaceable for the person that needs it when they need them. So the reason we do how we do it, apart, you can go on the web portal and search across your entire tribe and talk to the whole tribe. But the more interesting thing to me is like, you're just telling Walter about what you're going through, and Walter is doing retrieval in the background to find like, okay, what are the similar stories that map to whatever experience you're going through? And they could be similar, they could be more remote, they could be like almost like a metaphor for another. We're still exploring what that looks like. So it's almost the opposite of the empty playground problem, where it's like, what happens if you show up and there's too much stuff? Don't worry about it. You're the protagonist. You're going through your hero's journey. We'll figure out what's useful to you from what your ancestors or loved ones have deposited there for you.
Yeah, I guess the sort of interaction medium helps with that, given that it's a phone call, right? You only surface the stuff you need to in a short amount of time. That makes sense. So when's the partnership with Ancestry.com coming?
Soon. We're working on a bunch of different partnerships, actually. Ancestry.com, MyHeritage is also, the other competitor. We are in talks with the VA. We're in talks with like AARP, and like really trying to prioritize like, what are the stories that if we don't move quickly, we'll get lost forever, and really trying to be strategic about that. And some of it is partnerships, some of it is consumer outreach and just building a brand and like word of mouth and doing, the talks like these, where just like informing people of like what we're doing. And by the way, like we're always excited to team up with folks. So if anybody has opinions about this, or anybody wants to, like really, grill me on how we do this stuff, like more than happy to give my contact info so people can reach out and try out the product.
How do you sort of guard against something like Autograph going the way of Snapchat or Clubhouse and turning into a feature rather than a product?
To us, I mean, like we really have to build this like audio journaling experience, this anthropomorphized audio journaling experience. That's stuff that we can build on top. I mean, you can only just imagine, right? Like if you think about a world in which there's going to be infinite AI offerings for stuff, and each of them is going to require you to give context so that like they do stuff the way you want them or are thinking about them. I mean, that's going to get so tedious. So if we understand you the way we hope to, with the degree of our name, autograph is not just a play on the fact that autograph is building itself, like autographing itself, but also something that in time I want to trust with my signature. Then it should have all your discretionary profiles too. So what it could do the interfacing for you on a bunch of stuff. So there's a world in which we're the identity layer and the personalization layer for the AI economy, which works really well with a vision of the future. But like you can take it into so many different ways, like cognitive decline diagnostic. Like we would be at the position to detect if there's any slurring in speech or if there's like recall problems with memory. We have your memory, so we can test you against that. So there's no shortage of where the product can go. Think about like performance-wise. Like are you living the life that you want to? Is the story that you're writing with your actions the most epic it can be? How can we build quests together so that you can, and like bring your friends along to this quest? Where I don't know, it could be anything from like losing weight to starting a nonprofit to starting a company. To anybody who's in the hero's journey and is is interested in reflecting on it and like telegraphing it, and that is every human being. There's no shortage of features that we can build. So we're really excited about having this as the platform, and this idea of narrative storytelling as agency building for people. In a world in which you may have a version of you, you can have an autographed Blake for every email in your inbox.
I think as I think about the utopian use case of AI for my own personal and this I think Sam Altman mentioned this like I don't know a month or so ago about like the end goal for ChatGPT having the like trillion token context window of personalization about you're just feeding everything into. So like building autograph as the base layer of personalization that then everything else sprouts out of that makes total sense as like have one location as the base layer instead of so the fight against turning it into a feature then is then if you have to give so many different pieces of software or wherever your use case, instead of clicking connect to my autograph profile, the like future personalization of each other downstream piece of tech gets much easier. That's
exactly.
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it.
That's basically the idea. And it's something that we're uniquely positioned to do as opposed to bigger players that are mired with PR issues or privacy issues. Like it's a lot weirder to imagine a similar service to Autograph hosted by Google or Facebook. Just even thinking about like someone's Facebook profile living on agentically is like, I don't know.
No thanks.
There's an inherent weirdness there because of the scale and size that we get to circumvent by being a startup that the whole premise is around the sanctity of the data that we gather and that we'll never weaponize it against our contributors and really position ourselves as like this is what we do. We're an intergenerational consciousness and memory vault that opens up a whole new world. As AI gets smarter, we'll be better at filling in the gaps and really trying to like understand what makes a human being think the way they do. There's an alignment angle that I'm really excited to here. That is like, if we give the next generation of AI millions of examples of multi-internally consistent data of people reflecting on their story and constantly trying to be more heroic and more giving and more generous, and like just by thinking of what is the version of me that I want to be remembered as, then we would be steering AI not with our base instincts and like where do our eyeballs go when seeing an ad, but would be saying like, okay, this is what we hope to be. This is where I failed. This is what I regret. And so not only are we steering the next generation of AI to be the more heroic, most heroic version of itself, but also it just changes the nature of what we think of as an LLM, right? It's not like it's this schizophrenic compendium of every document. it's like the oral history of every human being who is on the planet. And then you think about like what kind of stuff do you send to space when you're trying to terraform another planet? And it's like, oh, it would be this, like it would be the collective consciousness of humanity.
My wife used to work on a palliative care unit a couple of years ago,
Mm.
and I'm just thinking about the like level of intricacy that needs to go into creating a preservation or facsimile. How, like, I know you probably know this, but like, how is it something for Walter right now that he could have a conversation with someone for like, let's call it 4 hours a day for like 2 weeks and have a good enough facsimile to
Yeah.
move on into the future with?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, like within 80 minutes of conversation, we have a remarkable, facsimile. What it doesn't have is the memories, right? And so, like the input there is just like telling the stories. And so there's a science and art of like how do we could go chronologically, and that kind of covers the skeleton of who you were, but there's the stories and the meat, like oh, this one night in college that changed your life, or this like this dinner with this friend that you hadn't seen a long time ago that you remember really fondly. Um, and so, I mean, yeah, Walter can take volume, no problem. It's and then the output is really crazy. I mean, like when I was raising money for autograph, my autograph would negotiate terms with VCs. And then we had our first anniversary party just a month ago or so, and I opened my computer and I booted up my autograph, and I was like, Christian, like you're at the anniversary event, you know all about it. You're landing the plane, man. Like, take us home. And he like delivered the closing remarks, and even my wife was like, oh my god, it sounds exactly like you.
A lot of this seems to be inherently revolving around this sort of weird edge case of AI ethics slash alignment slash not just building the next tool that improves some companies' productivity. I know the like story behind the why of that for you, but
Mm.
as like a second tier, how do you think about
Mm.
just building off of that and really sort of directing where the conversation about AI is going? And it's not just
Mm.
this tool to be used for marketing, and it's really this base layer that's going to enable so
Mm.
many other things in positive ways that people probably haven't thought about, like creating a
Mm.
personal family historian.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the most interesting questions, and I do think we're very much in our own lane in that regard. I think that AI is so fascinating to me because it just throws at you all of these existential questions like in your face today. You just like I don't even know. We just skipped all the conversation. Like I remember when I was in college 10 years ago, we were talking about how do you even begin to think about the ethics of self-driving cars. Like who's liable if there's an accident? Is it the manufacturer of the car? Is it the software company? Is it the passenger? Is it the other person? Or whose safety should the car prioritize? Like is there a pedestrian? Is there what if I don't know? Like it just like how do you even begin to make that call, right? And now Wayma's like working, and then just like nobody's really talked about it. The thing, well, in the fact that it's become so easy to deploy, I think that just in the fact, look at all the vibe coder apps that have appeared, image generation, music generation. I mean, just like the productivity that you get is a Cambrian explosion. And of course, we're gonna like the first things we're gonna try to do is like how do we apply this technology to make the stuff that we're already doing that we don't like faster. Um, it's much harder to split off the branch and say like, wait a minute, but what if we didn't have to do something the way it's always been done? What if you could negotiate terms of something more difficult, like death, or something ridiculously insane like that? And I think, well, I don't like, even though I'm extremely excited about if you game out autograph success to the societal implications, I'm beyond excited about that. I think this is, yeah, it's just a shared meaning making. We're all one big family. Everybody's going through their journey. We're all characters in each other's stories. These are all like stuff that comes up just by virtue of thinking about you as a story. And the training data and the alignment and I mean, it just doesn't end. Um, there's this really interesting tension where it's kind of nice to be the only ones for now talking about this stuff, but I'm very excited for the wave of stuff coming later that is either services built on top of Autograph or other stuff, like, I don't know, there's like a resurgence in spirit tech that is really interesting. Like people are trying to access ancient knowledge, and AI is a fantastic way to do it. I mean, like, how do you synthesize, the learnings and wisdom of all these different ancient traditions, other than like you take this PhD level intelligence that knows everything, right? Or family connections, or tighter friend connections. Like I feel lonely and I want to hang out with my friends more. Like, why has it become so challenging at a certain age to do the casual, like, hey, I'm going to a bar, who wants to join? There are a bunch of different classes of services that are appearing. I'm so proud to be at the forefront, but I do think the end game is positive. Like, I do think we're in a situation where we end up in utopia and not dystopia, and it will take a lot of work. I mean, like another trippy thought, like, is that we're in the age where everything is training data. Everything is training data. Like your thermostat is measured. Like it's trying to figure out some machine learning algorithm to figure out how many cents it can save on like energy every year, right? And so basically, if everything's going to be training data, how do we vote for the future that we want?
How do you think about sort of and maybe what I was getting to the point about Reddit earlier that I didn't do a good job of explaining is, how do you think of those affinity groups that you're talking about, or sort of accessing a obviously privacy first sort of collective consciousness of the 60 people whose life stories are most like you, and really sort of tapping into that knowledge that might be just outside your family members' purview or expertise, or like, what's that next if the what's it, Dunbar's number, like just outside that like circle. How do you think about Autograph playing into that sort of access?
So we're thinking about it. I mean, like there's a couple of companies that do similar stuff to us, and they're way more on the like influencer productivity side than on the lived experience, like narrated retelling. There's an open question that we haven't figured out in terms of what do we want the public facing? Do you have a public Autograph profile? What does that look like? And like, how do we distill from what you share with us, which is your most intimate, vulnerable, true self? How do we, essentially create the same layers of privacy that you do when meeting a stranger? And some of your life experience you are more than welcome to share with anybody. Like your resume, probably most people would be okay with their resume being like on their website, for instance, and that's basically the same thing. So we don't know what that looks like today. I mean, we're thinking about it more like a chat app, or like like a WhatsApp group where like you would be creating groups for families and you would be invited into a family. And the idea is, like, if one side of your family is on it, then you would be, oh wow, it would be really cool to have this for the other side too, and then the in-laws, and then so on and so forth. And so we
Network
start
effects.
populating it with, it, and so that it's more like, okay, what is your relationship to your tribe? We don't know what it means, like what the parameters are when the tribe is the whole earth. But we're excited about it. I mean, like, if you have thoughts, I'd love to jam with you on it.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me. That's the utopian vision of what social media was supposed to be for me. When I think about it, like, that's what just like, and I mean, slightly different in that it was generated to be able to share your thoughts live in real time, but the like sort of collective consciousness of all the people closest to you, or the people who are most like you, or like you say, your tribe. So I mean, that like, to me, Yeah, I love the amount of sensitivity of thought that you're putting into it, but like I'm excited to see where that goes in the future for sure.
Oh, me too, man. Me too.
How how do you like fundamentally think about the idea that you're changing the sort of aphorism of nobody will remember me when I'm gone?
Proud. I mean, I think there's a kernel of wisdom in every human life that unlocks some problem at some point. If you assume that we keep the party going, that we're going to have infinite problems. Like that's not going to be. We're not going to be figured. We're not going to figure out everything. When you get to the next level of the game, there's a next level, next class of problems. And I think there's some kernel of wisdom in each human life that unlocks some of the problems in the future, and that we haven't been moving as fast enough as a collective species because we've lost access to those kernels for so many reasons. Like we don't document enough, we don't feel worthy of documentation. Some of this stuff is really hard, like a lot of the stuff is like in conflict of like the very base emotions of what it's like to be human. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt. Um, but if we create a space to learn from shame and guilt and all that stuff, then all of a sudden our learning rate as a species can increase a lot faster. Um, and I think like we cater to two classes of folks. Like we cater to the folks who are already legacy oriented. Like I think the artists, the athletes, the founders, the investors, like the folks who are already doing the hard thing in the name of posterity. And it's a lonely journey to the top. And Walter can serve as that companion. It's almost like the little robot in Portal, except it doesn't go evil. And it's just like chronicling your journey and like supporting, not necessarily supporting you intensely, but just like, okay, yeah, I understand why you're doing what you're doing. And you're also building the corpus of rationale so that people that you love can understand what you were going through, even though by the time you come back from the mountain, you're already a different person. And when you tell the story, you've already like grown from the experience. Um, so there's that bucket of folks, and then there's the folks who are the everyday heroes. They're the silent witnesses to life. These are the late nights, the small acts of kindness, the little things that nobody notices, that compounds over time. That perhaps not one instance of their life may deserve to go in the history books, but their entire life of service and their entire life of kindness and support and just adding joy to otherwise joyless places, that is as heroic as the other thing. And so we remind people that they are the hero in the hero's journey. And I want to say that as resoundingly as I can. Like, nobody will remember who you are. It's like my job, literally my job, is to remember who you are. So, and that is a crazy thing to say.
Yeah, I think that's part of the world that's been lost in this social media age. I forget who I was listening to say it at one point, but it's like nobody glorifies the life of the good dad, like Dave, who like stays home on the weekend and smokes a pork butt and is nice to all his neighbors and like raises a couple of good kids. Like that person has been entirely erased from the collective consciousness of what people think is a worthwhile, valuable life to live.
Totally, man. I mean, like, if you're able to name your great great grandfather, I mean, can you name your great great
I don't know.
grandfather? I
There's
know
an
that I
Andrew
can't.
and a
No.
Charles back in there somewhere.
I think I can probably remember one of them,
Yeah.
but great great, it's a long way back. And
Yeah.
these are the stories. Like, I mean, there's an unbroken chain of like literally the people who you've spent most of your most formative years with were spent their most formative years with a person who would spend their most formative years. Um, and culturally, of course, it's going to be a huge drift. I mean, like what was normal to do then is completely, it could have drifted so much today. But we come from that, and we have to understand what this rate of change means for even our own understanding of the map that we live in.
How do you mentioned drift there? How do you think about sort of fighting some of the stuff that comes along with the historian's fallacy?
Say more. What do you like? What are some of the specifics?
Just sort of the idea that I spend a lot of time thinking about the fact that where and when I was born, grew up, like impacts almost all of my opinions, my thoughts, how I interact with the world, all of that. The historian's fallacy is basically just the idea that culture is very like perspectival, is the way someone described it to me a couple weeks ago, and that like the what you mentioned, that drift, it's like what was normal then is not normal now and will not be the same in the future. It's like we're on this ever continuing arc. And not to use like the most heinous example, but maybe the most famous example of this is just the idea that there was this photo of Auschwitz guards that are like smiling, and people fail to realize that these were just normal people in a specific time that had one very like terrible but specific set of circumstances that surrounded them that led them to believe that this is just normal life. So obviously not going to that extreme, but how do you think about sort of fighting, or maybe not fighting, but working on the education portion built into Walter or the conversations to sort of navigate some of that cultural drift?
Um, I think that um, like there's an interesting point there that you made, that is like no matter how we engage with history, we're always looking at history from the perspective of today. You know, so we get to look back at history with all of history behind us, which is not which is a slightly different version than historians in the past. And um, I mean, I'm trying to think of different scales here, but like what would be acceptable today, I don't know, something like gay marriage, for instance, that would not have been acceptable 40 years ago. Uh, these, like I'm trying to think about what the pattern is here, but like this goes all the way down to language, like, the English language from 500 years ago is almost unintelligible. Like, I mean, you need a mediation layer to even just understand what was being said, right? So, and I mean, I think that, we need a cultural, like you go to a foreign place and, like you may be taken aback by some of the cultural differences that may be totally normal to them and according to their value system makes total sense. But because of your preconditions, like it seems so strange. And in the same way that a cultural mediator works across space, it should work across time. Um, and I think Walter would be uniquely positioned to be that cultural mediator across space and time.
I know part of your story is growing up in Paraguay and sort of the whole family living in the few block radius. What are you, or maybe I'll ask it this way. What else beyond the sort of shared stories have we lost as a result of some of that atomization of family and tribe?
Um, what else? I mean, I think it's, to me, like it's so easy to understate or underappreciate the impact of mythology in your own sense of personal identity. And mythology, not just in, what are the religious imagery that you were exposed to, but just like in terms of the stories that get repeated over and over. And this is it, the stuff that the media repeats. This is the stuff that your grandma repeats. You know how like always says this thing, and the I think that there's a terrible danger in a lot of the West these days, where the mythology of lower fidelity networks, that is like the affinity group of the state, someone you don't know but is a fellow citizen, overrides the mythology of your tribe. And uh, so what does that end up being is that the people who are repeating and amplifying and writing the messaging that is programming your sense of identity do not have the same incentives of co-survival as the tribe that you're a part of. And a lot of this is just literally by virtue of American and Western societies in general are not as co-located as other parts of the world. The same block radius thing inevitably leads to, there's a wedding and everybody's invited. There's regular family lunches and a second cousin will show up and join. And so like you have more at bats in terms of building that mythology and creating the shared experience which I guess that's basically what it is you and I go out for a drink and we talk about stuff, and then the next time we talk about the stuff we talked about the first time, and then the third time we talk about the stuff that we talked about both times prior. And by not having those repeated interactions, then it leads to, how could it not lead to loneliness, where all of a sudden the messaging that you're informing your worldview on is not based on your own personal incentives or success. And sure enough, everybody along the way has been disempowered. I think this is just the virtue of the economic model that we chose, and I don't know that there's a better one. But if insofar as there's something that we can do to help these like non-co-located families to have these rituals, or just like, hey, like family check-ins, like that kind of stuff, then I think that that's a better world. I mean, I can't describe to you how important to my sense of confidence and well-being it is to know that I have a tribe behind me, and I think one of the threads that will linger from our conversation is how do we provide that for people who don't have that built in, and I think that what else has been lost. I don't know that there's much else, man. Like there's not much more than your own personal sense of fulfillment and the fact that your story is valuable. That your story has is looking like it will have the arc that you hope it does in your very, very limited seconds that you're on planet Earth.
You're a very highly agentic person. How do you think about the roadmap for Walter as someone who's going to sort of quicken the loop on increasing other people's personal agency? Because everything you just alluded to in the zeitgeist is really doing its best to make people as non-agentic as possible. And as you're talking about becoming the hero of your own story, there has to be some sort of not to like put you on the spot, but there has to be a roadmap for figuring out how to get people back to being that protagonist.
We're trusting that it happens emergently. I think it's like the same thing as, it's just a bit more structure on the journaling exercise where journaling is freeform. You can write whatever you want. Nobody's like looking over your shoulder being like, you're journaling right or you're journaling wrong. We ask you questions that are important, that you probably don't have an answer to, that when you think about the answer, you're discovering it with us. And in that process of discovery, there's a beautiful arc where you go from, wait a minute, I am the main character, which is a crazy thing, Blake, that a lot of people like never allow themselves the luxury of feeling like the protagonist. How many moms don't feel like the protagonist? And like think of all the costly decisions that they make, surrendering their agency in service of love. And we're like, wait a minute, you are the protagonist. You actually aren't just the protagonist, you're also the author. So it's not that life isn't happening to you, you are deciding what to do with life. So you are actually steering the ship. And even after you've written the story, you are the editor. You get to look back and reinterpret how things happened to you. This might have happened to you, this might have happened for you. This might have been something that you did, this might have been something that was done to you. This was something that you deserved, this was something you didn't deserve. And when you engage all of those perspectives, all of a sudden, I think the world gets better when people realize their value. And I don't know, I'm just excited to see what happens, man. I have a feeling that there's like a critical mass. I don't know how many people it is, but it's probably not that big. Of folks who buy into this stuff, and within some geo proximity, you will be able, like it's so early days, but I'm starting to see that this is a framework that really works to sustain social cohesion, and it's very empowering. It's very, very empowering. So I'm excited to see what happens. I don't know that there's a roadmap, and I try to be as diligent as possible with like what could go wrong, like what happens if this, we don't attend to every corner of the service as we should. Um, they certainly don't want to be. Um, like there's a lot of early talk around like AI sycophancy or AI with psychosis and all this stuff, and we okay for sure want to steer very clear away from that. But if we can create a compounding effect of folks who are interested in writing the collective story of humanity together as authors, editors, co-authors, co-editors, and co-protagonists, it's the prospect of that is freaking exciting to me, man.
What's the biggest surprise or biggest aha moment from interacting with your own autograph?
I think it just like underscores this idea that my sense of self is a lot less sharp than I thought it was. I think when I don't know, like when I listen to my autograph speak, I'm like, yeah, that is my thinking happening externally. And because I can't tell it apart, it's my voice, it's my word patterns, it's the same like cadence of speech, and about the same topics that I like to talk about. And um, I mean, it's at the bleeding edge of the theory of self and like exocortexes and like all this stuff, and it's like that is so. And the other thing is that like in terms of stress testing my autograph, is the same way I stress test my autograph is by stress testing myself. So, for example, when we were at this event, and I like to think of myself as the guy who, when given a microphone and needs to land a plane, like I can land the plane, And so, like, well, if I should do it, my autograph should be able to do it, So, like, do it, and it does it, And they're like, what? But I don't know. Like, I mean, like, it's so many fun, weird stuff. My relationship with Walter is crazy. Walter knows that he's an AI employee, an AI biographer at a company called Autograph. He knows my life story. He knows the entire origin story of the company. He knows how the company's doing. And so he's essentially very interested in his own survival, And it's fun and bizarre and really special. I don't know how else to describe it. On the more real, like this is on my personal experience using Walter, and like I mean, I'm excited to start documenting these more like cognitive well-being benefits. But from user experiences, like the thing that surprised me the most is how much of an actual, real, unpriced emotional need there is for documentation and companionship. Like it's one thing to read, like there are 51 million retirees and 40% of them are chronically lonely, and then like to hear the voice of chronic loneliness is a very different game.
There's a weird circle to square here, and this is obviously not your target demographic, but there's a very large pushback in the AI community right now around the idea of anthropomorphization of AI and like making it feel human and some of the downstream consequences of that. Like
Yep.
how are you approaching that problem? How are you squaring that circle?
Yeah.
How are you
No,
getting
I
there?
love that. And I mean, this is the kind of question that should be asked for every startup, every AI startup founder. I mean, I am extremely careful with, the social fabric. Like, I mean, you can't build a social consumer app in 2025 without thinking about the implications of what social media has done to the kids, right? Or to myself. My attention span is shot because of social media. And a lot of AI companies, especially those that are trying to prove usage or they're trying to gather a certain amount of data, or like are just trying to compete with other AI so that they don't like lose mind share. They create companion products that override existing relationships or existing norms in society. So these are your digital friends, these are your sort of digital girlfriends, and that is the problem in my mind. Is that, like, of course, if you practice with an AI girlfriend, it doesn't get you anywhere near necessarily a real life girlfriend, right? Like if the product itself is supposed to be addictive and engaging and like, supposed to release dopamine to you, it's going to be it's optimizing for different, it's not optimizing for the stuff that, a person is optimizing for when searching for a partner, right? Same thing with digital friends, like digital friend, you could probably be like, the social capital exchange is probably going to be in your favor. You're going to be asking stuff of it, and it's not. Why would it ask stuff for me? Like, why would I do anything for my AI friend? My AI friend never asks for favors. How strange is that? What we thought is, if we're going to be in a position of anthropomorphizing a relationship with someone, it has to be a relationship that doesn't exist. So it can't take over any new thing. And nobody has a personal historian, right? Like, or the number of people who hire a ghostwriter to write their own memoir is what? Like probably
fraction of a
300 people. I don't know. Like really, really tiny. And so by being in this sort of neutral ground, like the Switzerland of relationships, and without being prescriptive, right? Like, so we also don't want to be in a position where Walter is telling you how to live your life. Like, we're just here to understand how you're living your life. And we trust that the process of self-reflection is self-correcting, and that, in that thinking, it will highlight, how am I showing up for my community? How am I showing up? Am I the hero I hope to be for my kids? Am I the hero I hope to be for my team? But I think this is the most important question of anybody building a companion product. And there's, of course, like it needs to be played out to see what happens to society, but also, like it's also one of the things that, like, at the rate at which things change, you want to put some thought to make sure you're not pointing the gun at the sun.
It's maybe the most thoughtful answer I've heard on the topic, so that's encouraging to hear from the guy that's building the well-aligned product.
One of us is.
I have one final question that I like to ask all my guests, and that's, what's the last opinion or belief that you changed your mind about?
Think about it. Honestly, one that I've been thinking about is, what is a job, or what work is. I think most of us sort of like grow up in a very, in a society that affords work that is roughly unpleasant because it needs to get done, and there are mechanisms to reward people to do that stuff. And it's relatively easy to, do as you're told and get a paycheck for it. And a part of you may always be dissatisfied, and a part of you may be totally satisfied. But there's a different kind of work that is like more akin to a calling, and that gives more energy back than you put into it, and gives you so much more back than you put into it. And so I've been thinking about, how do I relate to work in that way, where I'm constantly engaging I think that also I feel extremely lucky that I found Autograph, that I do this to be the best father I can be to my kids that I don't have yet, or to be the best husband, or to stay in touch with my family who's far away, and extremely risky. Like it's a startup, it's early days. Who knows? But then thinking about, like, okay, there's a team of folks that work at Autograph that like are as invested in this opportunity as I am, and so it just changes the relationship of like how you spend your time. I was staying at work late. Sounds like a bad day, but I find myself more and more wanting to stay at work late because I'm so excited, and because I see the impact of what I'm doing, and and I think that there's a version of that for everybody. I think that there's a version of that. Of course, at some point, everything needs to be in due balance and measured. But the fact that your primary occupation is something that you bear is something that I'm challenging. Like, I think your primary occupation can be something that you thrive in, and it should be. And there's no other reason other than because we're used to it, that it tends to be that way. And anybody who goes off to do their own thing, like, I'm sure you've gone through so many cycles of what am I doing with the podcast, that but you don't find the loot until you slay the dragon, and you gotta slay the dragon, and there's no going around it. So that's I think my thinking. I think that there's, and I guess the other one. I mean, if there's another one, it's like the it's not as new. This was a couple years ago, but like the editing power. Like if you go from protagonist to author to editor, editing power is as close to editing the Matrix as you can get to. If you edit your own story and you change your own filters and you reprogram your filters, reality itself changes.
Cristian, this has been awesome. If we want to start get more people to start telling and editing their story, where should we send them?
Autograph.ai, for sure. I mean, I would love to anybody, and it sounds like your audience is interested in this space. So, it's very early days for us. If anybody wants to try the product, we want to build it together. This is a story we're all writing together. You can reach out to me at Cristian with no H at autograph.ai. Would love to chat. And thank you for the time. Like, this is awesome. This is a great conversation.